Hello, and welcome once again to the Marijuana Resolve Show, taped here in Brattleboro at the BCTV studios. We have with us today two special guests, and Daryl Pillsbury is in the director's chair today. And he won't be on this side, but he definitely will be taking care of business on the other side. We have a lot of things to talk about because our 2013 legislative session will begin in January. And to my right is far right is Matt Simon, who is the legislative analyst for the Marijuana Policy Project in Washington, D.C. And to my immediate right is Senator Jeanette White, who was recently reelected to the Vermont State Senate, and she has been returned to office for lots of good reasons, and you will hear from her that will help you to understand why. She's an extremely important part of the political structure here in Vermont. Welcome both Jeanette and Matt. I'm glad that the two of you could be with us.
Yep.
We, as you know, we have hopefully in 30 minutes that we could cover, and we always found it's not enough time, but to cover what we could expect in some degree in Montpelier starting in January in the 2013 session. So I think I'd like to start with you since you're reelected as senator. Why don't you start us by talking about some thoughts that you have in the upcoming legislature and how Matt can work with us to help make that happen.
Sure. Well, as you know, last year I had an amendment on a bill that was for decriminalization, and I think we're following that. It didn't pass. It got taken off. Well, I think the whole bill didn't pass, but the amendment was taken off in any case. And so this year, we can turn in drafting requests already. I turned in a drafting request to put that into a separate bill, a standalone bill, and I would introduce it this year. But when Colorado and Washington passed their voter initiatives, I said, I'm not going to do that this year. So what I did is I've changed the request, and it's now a really a three-step process, I guess, right? The first step would be decriminalization of the penalties starting in July of 13, right? Okay. Assuming that it gets passed this next year, then it would become effective July.
Okay.
So decriminalizing the penalties then, setting up a what we call a summer study committee, and looking at not should we legalize, but how it would be legalized. Like looking at all the details on growing, where could it be grown, does it have to be grown inside? Like in Colorado, the dispensary, the medical marijuanas it's all grown inside, and it's a little bit different than growing hops and then bringing the hops to the brewery, because here the product itself is what you are using. It isn't processed. So how you would do that, how you would regulate the quality, how you would sell it, where you would sell it, who you would sell it to, how you would deal with underage kids, how you would tax it. I know in Colorado they're proposing something like 25% or something. It's incredibly high. I think that if you do something like that, you'll just it'll encourage the black market anyway, because people aren't going to pay that kind of. And we generated last year almost $20 million from liquor taxes in Vermont. So I would assume
That's
that it's not gonna be this as much to begin with, but I would assume it's gonna be up there in the 10, 11, 12 million dollars just from the generation of from the tax.
Which is a significant revenue.
Yeah, it is.
It not? I mean, it would seem to me anyway.
Well, that's what we get from liquor sales, just for the taxes that's generated from them. So that's what I'm turning in this year, and then that committee would come back in January of 14 with their recommendations and all the details on how to do it, and then in July of 14 it would become legal.
Now, did you? How did you?
that
Well,
ambitious or what?
I like it.
Just like that.
I mean, we've been waiting a long time to hear that. So how did the Burlington vote have any impact on any of this, really, or?
I didn't even pay attention to the Burlington vote.
Is there? Why would you say that? May I ask?
Because
it was not. It's a non-binding vote.
Right.
Okay, so it doesn't have any teeth.
And it wouldn't affect the rest of the state. Only Burlington.
Right. Okay.
So, I knew that it was a substantial in
the margin.
favor.
Oh yeah, they had.
But I must admit that I didn't.
I see.
The votes in both Colorado and Washington, I thought were more. They propelled me more because I think that the only way we're going to make it legal nationally is by states jumping on and doing it themselves.
Okay, so it was as a
states.
full state issue.
Yeah.
Is really what you're thinking of, which of course is the legislature,
Right.
Not the town,
Right.
Okay.
And those are and we hear the same thing is true with town meeting votes. Those are non-binding and they're
Yes.
sentiments.
A sentiment. In fact,
Yeah.
I was telling Matt that we have that coming up in March. There is a push to do that. Frankly, I'd like to know. I'm much more interested in not because I'm not for the sentiment. I am, and I thought it was a great margin. 71% said in favor of legalizing cannabis products. That's significant. But really, is not the realism behind this, which is why Matt works so hard on this issue, us here as well as New Hampshire, that it's a state legislative target that we have to deal with. We're not really even dealing with the people so much or a voting process, but what is the state legislature going to do?
Well, yeah, I think so, and I think I'm sorry. Did you?
Oh, go right ahead.
Well,
I've
I
already
think
talked
that
for quite some time.
I think that the population is probably ahead of the legislature.
Yes,
on this.
yes.
And I think that
That's right.
anytime, what I've found in my 10 years up there is that whenever you start talking about drugs, sex, and probably rock and roll, knees go weak.
Rock and roll's okay.
Rock and roll. Well, I don't know. We did some stuff with copyrights once,
Oh.
and people got a little weak in the knees. But I think that they are topics that tend to generate more emotional and less objective information and
Yes.
positioning. So
It's
it is a state
That's
issue.
fascinating that you should say that about sex and drugs. I believe that there is something to that. But in terms of the drugs and the marijuana issue, tell us what you do, Matt, in terms of or what's your idea? Because next year could be a really busy time period. What's on your mind about this?
And how are you going to support us? Because we're going to need it.
Any way I can.
Okay.
Because certainly Vermonters are ready for this reform, and any way that I can help bring any knowledge or experience or what's happened in other states to the table and help convince people get the votes that we need to pass these bills. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm glad to only live 2 hours from Montpelier. I can show up anytime
Where do you live?
I want. I live in Goffstown, New Hampshire, just outside Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
So an hour and a half to BCTV studios and,
Yes,
and
and
show up on the Marijuana Resolve shows.
A little bit farther to
fantastic.
Montpelier.
It is a little farther,
but
but it's
doable.
very doable compared to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, yeah.
And I look forward to doing that in the upcoming session. Now, my sense of things, having been following this for a year in Vermont, I know that people are ready to reduce the penalty for marijuana possession. That is, by more than a 2-to-1 margin, people are ready for that. I think the votes are there in the House and Senate to do that. It should just be a fine. We do not need police officers spending their time dealing with minor marijuana arrests. Court time does not need to be spent dealing with minor marijuana arrests. There are serious crimes being committed that should have the attention of law enforcement, and that would improve public safety. So that, I believe, there is overwhelming supermajority consensus And just last week, with the superstorm of a general election, everybody is so excited about the idea of making marijuana legal for adults, regulating the production and sale of marijuana, taxing it, and having that be an alternative policy to prohibition, that I'm very encouraged to hear that conversation is taking place. Senator White just surprised me by telling me she wants to make that part of her bill next year, and I hope the legislature is ready to have that conversation. We'll certainly see.
I love that analogy of a marijuana superstorm for the national election, because if it does things like it sort of shifted your goals somewhat. I mean, you had one before that, and then after what happened there, you decided to take it in a little more different direction. When you, so can I get this straight, just for at least myself, if not our viewers, that when you guys go to the legislature and you two are working together in some sense, let's say, you have two directions. One is a decriminalization bill, and the other one is the legal bill. Can you tell our viewers, is this the first time you've introduced a legalization bill?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you haven't done that before, because we know you've worked. Jeanette's worked on the decriminalization issue for a good long time, but this is new. Mm-hmm. Following the marijuana superstorm during the election is a good. Sounds like the timing is perfect there. If you were to predict what you're looking for in the Senate, both of you, because the Senate has to do, the way it works, I guess, the Senate has to do its bill, the House does its bill. Then there's what, a reconciliation of?
Well, it's, on something like this, we'll probably just start it in one body instead of having two bills. So we do the bill, I'm assuming that we'll start it in the Senate. We'll do a bill. We'll have all the hearings. We'll figure out what we're going to do. We'll pass it in the House, whatever it is. I mean, in the Senate, whatever it is that we pass. Then it goes to the House, and it starts all over again. The same bill goes there.
You send it to the House.
Yeah, the same bill goes there.
Now, that's true for both the decrim bill and your legal
every
bill.
Okay. Every bill happens that way.
Okay.
But this is just one bill.
Right.
This isn't two separate bills that I'm talking about.
It's only one bill?
It's one bill.
Okay. When will the public be able to see what that bill? And is there a way for us to get the bill to the public while it's in progress in the legislature?
Well, while it's in progress, sure. The way it works is we have legislative counsel that are attorneys. We don't have our own staff.
Right. Okay.
So there's a group of legislative attorneys, and they write the legislation for us. So I put in my request and I say, Michelle, I want you to do a bill that does this and this and this. Okay. And then she starts writing the bill and she sends it to me, and I say, no, I don't really like that, and I send it back to her. Okay. We go back and forth and back and forth. At that point, it's completely confidential because she's acting as my attorney, writing my bill for me. Well, it has to be because there isn't a bill yet.
Right, okay.
So then when it gets to the point where I like the way it's written,
right,
then I sign off on it, and then I can get co-sponsors if I want.
Now, co-sponsors, but you don't need co-sponsors. You could do this on your own if you want, or start it up.
And sometimes it's just more trouble than it's worth to get co-sponsors.
I see.
Because you have to run around and get people's signature on a piece of paper.
Well, I know some senators would co-sponsor. I mean, Senator Ruth or Benny.
Well, they would co-sponsor decrim. I'm not sure if they would co-sponsor legalization.
I think one of them might, but in any case, you're right.
So then,
now, how is that separate from the decrim bill? I mean, I'm not sure how you could have one bill for both decriminalizing and legalizing.
Well, because I'm setting it up in a 3-step process.
Oh, the 2-step process.
Right. So,
meaning decrim would precede,
and then a study committee to come up with the details of how you would control
marijuana.
And then after you come up with that, then you would make it legal. Or you could just do a 2-step process and come up with the not do the legalizing part until you've come up with the study committee to have the details, so that you have something then to. That's the way we did it with medical marijuana. That the study committee went out, and then they come back and they recommend legislation. So and then what happens though is on January 9th when we go up there, when we start, all the bills that have have been given a number, have been signed off on by the sponsors and have been given a number, are introduced into the Senate, into the body. And that's when it becomes public knowledge.
Well, tell Matt and me and the viewers out there something about the decrim part of this. What are you looking for? What are you recommending?
I can't remember the details last year. I think it was anything under 2 ounces, and it was a simple fine. It was a civil fine. There was no record. It was, and kids under 21 were treated. It was treated like a malt beverage. So kids under 21 had a different system. It wasn't a decriminalization for them. It was treated as if they had a, what do we call that? A possession of malt beverage.
Yeah, I believe I don't know if it's exactly the same or somewhat similar, but they would have to complete community service drug awareness program.
Exactly the same. And in fact, in the bill, in the decrim bill, it doesn't say what they have to do. It says that it'll be treated exactly as possession of malt beverage.
Mm-hmm. I remember there were 2 bills last year, one in the House, one in the Senate, and they were slightly different.
Right.
I think the House bill, I believe, was 1 ounce or less, $150 civil fine
with no criminal record.
Right.
So then, basically, the decrim bill is divided by what we do for adults, of course, and how we treat underage possession separately. Adults, there's no criminal record. There's a small fine. Now for the underage, because by the way, this is very important here in Vermont. We have a lot of, and I've seen it myself, young people smoking pot. I mean, and who clearly were not 21 years old. Are they protected also in the sense that say their scholarships are protected, or that they, they also do not have a criminal record?
You would be treated exactly like if they had beer or wine or liquor. It would be treated in the same way. So if they lose scholarships for, which I don't think they do.
No, they don't. I don't.
So I don't think it would be treated exactly the same way.
Okay, good. That's good. It protects both the underage.
And they have to do some community service, and they have to probably do a, what do you call that, restitution or diversion. Something.
Diversion for the underage, and of course not for the adults, because why would you want to have that for adults? Adults do not need the supervision. Otherwise, we'd all, with as many people that smoke marijuana in this state, we'd all be in the retreat, I guess.
We wouldn't be saving the same amount of money then, because we'd be involving the whole court system and the whole legal system.
Right, so which is what we want to avoid.
Right.
And to be clear on the aid question, there's federal financial aid and then there's state level stuff. You could lose federal financial aid over a criminal marijuana conviction.
The underage could still be.
Yeah. That federal law has been revised somewhat. It's not as bad as it used to be, but if you were a current college student and you're convicted of marijuana possession, even if it's just a joint, you could lose your aid for that year.
The damn feds just don't want to give up, do they? I mean,
the collateral consequences of being arrested for any crime and being convicted of any offense is something that can follow you for quite a long time.
Yeah,
that's why we think
it's
really key that record not be created.
Right.
And if it does need to be created for a minor, that they be wiped when they're 21.
I always found it ironic, a terrible irony, in fact, that the drug laws can do more harm than the drug itself, which is bizarre.
Well, when we had I introduced this about 5 or 6 years ago, and they did end up holding some hearings, and we ended up passing a bill out of the Senate. It wasn't what I would have passed, but it was something, and so it was a huge step. And no, I take that back. We passed it out of the committee, and we were ready to pass it out of the Senate, and then I don't remember what happened. But what was I gonna? I just had a senior moment.
I think 5 or 6 years ago, people were still not ready.
Right, but what I remember was when we had the public hearing, this room was full of people, and I took one look around and I said, "Ooh, all these people hate this bill," and with only one exception, every single person testified in favor of it. And there was one woman who, when you said that the drug laws create more problems than the drug itself. This woman was a counselor, a high school counselor, and she said that every time she dealt with a kid who was dealing with alcohol or hard drugs, that it was the drug itself that caused the problem. But when she was dealing with kids who were in corrections because of marijuana, it wasn't the marijuana that was causing the problem. It was the fact that they were caught up in the legal system.
Exactly.
And I thought that was so, her testimony was so compelling.
That's fascinating.
And she was a high school counselor. She dealt with kids all the time. But even then, that was 5 and 6 years ago, even then, the entire room, with the exception of one person, and law enforcement is tired of this. I mean,
it's a struggle anyway, all around.
I think opinions are mixed behind that blue line.
Oh, they are mixed.
Yes,
they are mixed. But one of the things that I know that one of the concerns is the whole driving while impaired issue, and that is an
which
issue.
one? I'm sorry.
Driving while impaired.
Yes.
And how you deal with that.
Right. You know, what's interesting is I think sometime what they ought to do is have special testing programs just to see what the impairment really is.
Well,
you have those kind of testing programs for alcohol where they'll show you this is what happens when you drink and drive. You don't have them for marijuana. Years ago, when I've been smoking really most of my life. I did drive. In fact, when I would go on long trips, I don't do this now, but I did back then in my early 50s. I would actually bring along a little bowl because if I had like a 400-mile trip, on the highway, and you put in a CD, and I found that when I drove that way, I was more inclined to be careful and drive slower and pay attention to what I'm doing than if I'm in a hurry and I'm really, playing road rage here or something like that.
But there's a line where you don't want to be doing it, no matter how careful you think you're being.
I'm not advocating that people do. What I'm saying is there's been no testing to determine what the impairment is. So having law enforcement having impairment on their minds doesn't do very much because they have no data to work from.
Right. Well, to be clear, you're absolutely right. The evidence is lacking in this area. There needs to be substantial research on the actual effects of marijuana on people who are driving, impairment levels. How much does experience affects this? Marijuana affects a different part of the brain than alcohol. Alcohol has a much more reliable effect. Even if you're an experienced alcohol user, you're going to have better tolerance than somebody who doesn't drink, but your motor skills still go straight down the toilet based on the amount of alcohol in your system. So, the BAC is not a perfect system, but it is at least pretty close to telling you who's impaired and who's not. Marijuana is not going to be quite that easy to decide, but we need this research to take place. But people need to understand it is illegal to drive while impaired on marijuana and on any substance, and none of the legislation we're talking about is going to make it legal for people to drive while impaired.
Exactly.
And the few trips that I took like that were really rare. I generally would not drive a vehicle impaired. I'm a drinker. I drink my port and my sherry, probably too much. But I never ever drive while drinking. And if I were smoking, I don't think I would be driving. And
right.
I wouldn't.
There is some sociological evidence and studies that were done on this that people who use marijuana actually don't like to drive, prefer to stay home.
And if they do drive,
as opposed to alcohol, which sometimes
get in a
turns
car
people into
recklessly.
Mario Andretti, and they go. I've seen this at college parties, and I'm sure you guys have too. A person who's sober gives you their keys, say, "I'm drinking tonight, I'm not going to drive," and then after they get 15 in them, they want their keys back.
Right.
That's scary. Okay, marijuana doesn't do that to people, I don't think. And
by the way, I heard, I read a report that in the states where medical marijuana, and maybe both of you might know this better, has been in play for a while, that there has been no surge in driving while intoxicated incidences. And I think maybe in any of the states that might have had decrim also, what when you have, in the decrim states and the medical marijuana states, they do not associate irrational driving in those states Whereas you would think that in those kind of states where you would have more marijuana consumption, that you would see a spike in driving while intoxicated. And I believe that the reports are just the opposite. You don't have that.
There was one report earlier this year or late last year by researchers that I want to say was Montana State University in Colorado also that found in medical marijuana states where adult use has increased. Now, Vermont's not one of those states because Vermont has such a restrictive medical marijuana program. It's only about 600 patients or so.
Right.
So it hasn't affected use rates in Vermont at all. But in Colorado, adult rates is up somewhat. Use rates are up somewhat. And there's actually a reduction in the carnage on the roads, a modest reduction. And these authors of the study attributed that to a substitution effect. They theorized that people were drinking less and choosing marijuana as an alternative, and therefore not that there was less drunk driving because marijuana was available as a substitute. Now, this is not a bulletproof study.
No, but still, it's indicative of what we're talking.
But we do want to be a little bit careful with that because we don't want the liquor industry to be opposing this.
The liquor industry, I believe, are already opposing this.
No, I'm not so sure. My guess is that the tobacco and liquor industry is jumping right on.
You would think.
This.
You would think. 2 years ago in California, when California had their initiative, there was opposition from, I believe it was the beer distributors in California, and also I want to say Jim Beam, and some of these groups have some of the alcohol companies have been connected with the anti-drug movement.
Oh, they have a
huge partnership for Drug-Free America and stuff like that. So the status quo works for them. Alcohol and tobacco are two drugs that have a high potential abuse, and they're completely legal, unscheduled federally. And marijuana, which is for many people a safer alternative to alcohol, is illegal federally.
So these are the kinds of things that we are going to use you for. I mean, because we don't have any staff to provide us with information and doing research.
Right, and it's,
so and I'm sure we'll have plenty of research being done on all sides of this issue, but we depend on advocates.
There's
are you going to be a paid lobbyist up there? I mean, are you going to be a registered lobbyist?
I may be.
Yeah. He talked to Daryl. Can talk to him more about that because.
You probably would have to be.
Yeah, and that's okay.
I've been registered in New Hampshire for several years.
Yeah. Okay, so
I know the drill.
So that's gonna be really important, and I'm so glad to hear you say that because what MPP Marijuana Policy Project does, and Matt is one of the legislative analysts for Marijuana Policy Project. Yes, I see. We have 1 minute and 32 seconds. What Rob set up, and I think he had a partner back then also, the red-headed fellow, I can't think of his name, and long before your time, was articulate, well-versed people that when they go before the legislature can look at them and say, this is not a pot-smoking hippie, this is, and we have that. And with the new session coming in, what you're introducing just dazzles me.
Let's wait and see what it looks like.
The thought of you doing that dazzles me because it's a step. And I think Daryl and I both, right? I mean, we would, and Joe, we're probably going to be elated here. See, we got 2 thumbs up already from Joe. It's just we need that. It's a shot in the arm that we want to hear more about, and even help you also as much as we can, and work with Matt. He gets paid by the Marijuana Policy Project, so we have them to thank for him working in the Northeast sector here, which is a new hotbed of marijuana reform. So
it's mpp.org, by the way.
It is www.mpp.org. Now, thank you once again. Our show has come to an end, and Jeanette White, Senator Jeanette White, and Matt Simon from the MPP organization, thank you.